a Motorsport Podcast Network production.
Hey everyone, welcome along. This is the V8 Sleuth Podcast for another week. We are back from Adelaide from a big grand final of the Supercars Championship. Plenty happening over there. A big congratulations. Chaz Mostert is the champ for the first time in his Supercars career. Heartbreak for Brock Feeney, who did everything right up until the point that it all went wrong on Sunday in Adelaide. So many angles and so much to discuss and so many things to go through. We will go through Adelaide on the next episode of The Undercut. You can watch it on YouTube, through our website, and also listen to the podcast version here via pretty much whichever podcast platform you're listening to. But on this episode of the pod, it's one that we recorded while we were in Adelaide. We got a little chance to catch up with Leigh Diffey, who has been an amazing Australian motorsport export story now for the best part of a quarter of a century. So these days, Diff's calling the NASCAR Cup Series, among a range of other sports at NBC. Of course, he was the voice of the Indianapolis 500 and the IndyCar Series for some time, and of course his credentials in Australia are so well known. He was in Adelaide as an ambassador for the Adelaide Grand Final. Of course, it was the 40th anniversary of the Adelaide Street Race, going back to the first Grand Prix there in 1985. He had so much on his plate in Adelaide. Lots of appearances on the broadcast, in the event precinct, so many familiar faces for him to connect with and to catch up with. And thankfully, we were one of those. So we grabbed Diff for a bit of time in the media centre. Look, it's not the ideal audio recording conditions, but you know what? It's not often that we get to see Diff in person. We could do a podcast online and we might do a bigger one down the track. But the chance to have a chat with him and a catch up and throw some questions and get his thoughts on a bunch of stuff was too good to pass up. So we sat down in the media centre with the microphone, plenty of questions to be jammed into this podcast as well. His is an amazing story. It's been told in a lot of different places over the last few years, but we were able to get a snapshot with him of a bunch of different topics and questions. So anyway, sit back, relax, and enjoy Leigh Diffey on the V8 Sleuth Podcast. Leigh Diffey, it's taken a long time. You had to fly halfway around the world, but welcome to the V8 Sleuth Podcast.
Well, it's an honour to be on it. Apologies for my kind of husky voice. I'm just getting over a little illness, but I'll be able to keep talking all the way through, hopefully.
Well, you've been talking for 25 years, so don't stop now. We're sitting in the media centre at the Adelaide Grand Final. I nearly said 500. It's a bit of a habit for us. You're here as part of this 40-year celebration. There's so much that we want to talk about. We've got limited time, but we thought while you're here, we'd love to get you on for a chat. But what are your impressions having come back? I mean, last V8 round you were at was probably with Speed 2011 when you and Mike Joy and Darrell Waltrip and Calvin Fish came to Bathurst and Goldie and I think you came here as well. But what's changed? What's different? What's the same? What do you think?
It's a great question you asked, because what has happened is it's made me go back down memory lane. So got to call the first Adelaide 500, which was called the Sensational Adelaide 500 in 99. Came back in 05 and 06, and then had some more years away, of course, back in the States. And I did come back with Speed Channel when we did Bathurst and the Gold Coast 600 live. And the following year, in 2012, was the last time I was at a Supercars event, and that was with the international drivers, the Invitational on the Gold Coast. For 3 years in a row, I worked with Gary Rogers, now the late Gary Rogers, and GRM in helping supply an international driver. So first I provided Patrick Long, and Gary was very happy with Pat. And then the following year it was Simon Pagenaud, and Gary's like, wow, we're 2 for 2. And then the third year I brought, which was 2012, I brought out Ricky Taylor, the sports car race. And unfortunately, and Gary nicknamed him Ricky Bobby, and unfortunately it didn't work out so great for Ricky because his teammate James Hinchcliffe had stalled it on the grid, and they came flying through, and Ricky went flying through the air, and it was over as soon as it started. But so it's been a long time since I've been to a Supercars event, but the one thing that hasn't changed is the quality. It's amazing.
Walking around here, you've been around the precinct for a couple of days, there's stuff everywhere. There's motocross bikes, there's sprint cars until it rained, there's support categories, there's food vans, there's concerts, there's a bit of everything. This is, once upon a time this was just a car race, but it's not a car race anymore.
Well, I like to look at look at people's reaction who haven't seen something like this. And here this weekend we've got two Americans in Austin Cindric, Daytona 500 winner Austin Cindric, and the recently crowned NASCAR Xfinity Series champ Jesse Love. Now Jesse's only 20, so he hasn't been around the block too many times, but he's been around a lot of motorsport. But his eyes were so wide yesterday. We were doing an interview on the broadcast. We were trying to do it while a dragster was going down the front straight, and he said exactly what you said. I've never seen anything like this in my life. The track doesn't go cold. There's drift cars right now while we're speaking out on the track, the supercars, the Super 2, the Speedway, the Supercross, and I love that reaction. And I said, well, this is how we do it in Australia. Yeah. It's not just a race meeting, it's an event, and I love the fact that Australian motorsport hasn't changed in that regard.
What else hasn't changed? When you come back, I mean, faces, we're all a bit older, we're all a bit tubbier, all that sort of stuff. But what's changed? What's the biggest standout for you when you walk back in? But you still talk to people here all the time. You keep abreast when you can of what's going on down here. You've got heaps going on in North America. But what's the thing that stands out when you walk in here this weekend?
I think the level of professionalism. And I made a comment on the broadcast the other day with Neil Crompton and Mark Scaife. You know, I've had the fortune of, just this year alone in 2025, I was at the Daytona 500 as a guest. I called the Rolex 24 Sebring 12 hour. I was at the Indy 500 as a guest, which I used to call the Indianapolis 500. I was at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I called the NASCAR Championship finale. And keeping all that in mind, this event here, the BP Adelaide Grand Final, is world class. I would put it up against any of those events for what's happening on track, the organisation of the paddock, the fan access, the fan activation zones, the concession areas, the sun shielding on the grandstands, to take care of the fans the best way possible, the access in and out of the track, just everything, and then the professionalism of the show. We got enough going on the track, and then off the track there's a Lenny Kravitz concert and an AC/DC concert. It just doesn't really get any better. And so, but since I've been here, and every time I keep coming back, it just seems that the professionalism just keeps getting ratcheted up, and I don't even know how much further it can go, because to me, this is like spot on.
It's hard to make it much better. What is new this weekend is us playing finals in Supercars for the last few rounds. Champion will be crowned. As we're talking, we have no idea of the four who's going to win it, but you've experienced that now with the calling Cup, and of course Xfinity and Truck are doing it as well. What's your take here? Because there is a reluctance for change by a lot of fans. I love it. I think it's fantastic. It follows the ball sports, the concept of being your best when it matters the most. What's your take and what you've seen and felt around? It's easy for us to get a viewpoint of how it's deemed over there, but you're there. So how's it viewed there, and how do you view what we've got here?
Well, so there's two parts to that question, two answers to that question. The NASCAR fan base, and probably NASCAR in general, have voiced their opinion and their feelings that it's time for a change in the NASCAR playoffs format. NASCAR has responded by saying, we are listening, we hear you, and more than likely change will come in some shape or form. How does that look? Do they go back to the original, because we've now had basically 10 years of the old chase format and then 10 years of the playoffs format. What does that look like? Some people say going to a 4-4-3, have three races to determine it. Some say go back to the old chase format of just it's the top 10 drivers for 10 races, highest points win at the end of that. Who knows? I don't know what it's going to look like, but I would expect some change to happen. So for here in Supercars, I don't mind change, because try something different, and if it doesn't work, no big deal, go back to how it was. So I kind of applaud the change. Give it a go, which is the Australian ethos, right? How we all grew up. Give it a go, try something, and if it doesn't work, you can go back. But what I do like about this format is that it's not a one and done, is that you have the three races over this BP Adelaide Grand Final. So if you had a bad Friday, yesterday was raining, anything could have happened to the championship contenders. You have two more races to bounce back, and I like that. So fortunately nothing too dire happened to the championship four, so we'll see what happens over the two races, but that's what I like about it.
We've been building a bit of a
unofficial closer tie, NASCAR Supercars. Austin Cindric, Jesse Love here this weekend. Some Aussie boys have had a crack at Cup in the last couple of years with one-offs, and Jack Perkins did some Xfinity. Can you see a bit more of that coming as there's more road courses in NASCAR these days than there were back in the day, that they're putting some eyes on here? I mean, there's some old supercars banging around over there with guys doing plenty of laps in them. There's an opportunity here for a bit more than we've ever had to do the crossover between one and the other.
I think the relationship between NASCAR and supercars has never been closer. The overlap has never been closer. Probably, in some regard, the cars have never been closer. Even though Dick Johnson went over to the States decades ago, really you could point at Marcus Ambrose as being the pioneer. And what Marcus achieved was phenomenal. But then he set that path and that goal. And then Scott McLaughlin to go to IndyCar, and Scott did so well after leaving Australia on top. But what Shane Van Gisbergen did was just explode the recognition and acknowledgement and the notoriety of supercars in America. It's not even questionable, and Marcus would tell you that, and even Scotty Mack would tell you that. And then the cameos, of the Jack Perkins and the Will Browns and Brody Kostecki's and everybody who's gone over and had a crack. It's just, the awareness is there now. It's fantastic that Austin Cindric and Jesse Love are here, and they're going to go back with a myriad of stories. I saw Jesse Love after his first day on track on Thursday. He said, "I could go home now. I've learnt so much," that's what you want, right? Yeah. That's what it's all about. And who knows what the future looks like? Maybe in our motorsport dreams, NASCAR could come here. Who knows? If IndyCar could go to the Gold Coast for so many years, why not NASCAR here at this BP Adelaide Grand Final? I think that all sports always look outside. Look, I've got friends on the executive teams of various NRL clubs. They're always doing trips to England, Europe, America to see how other teams are performing, other teams are operating, how do they handle their strength and conditioning, how do their recovery with their athletes, what do their facilities look like. And motorsport's the same, and NASCAR don't have their blinders on. They're looking, they know what supercars are doing, they look at IndyCar, they look at Formula One. Everybody, you'd be naive not to keep your eyes and ears wide open, and what could I learn from these other categories? And I certainly know that Supercars does it the other way, like looking at NASCAR. So I applaud the relationship and can't wait to see where it goes.
You're calling Cup now. Has that been received over there? I mean, you've been in the States now for 20 plus years, yeah. And you've done all, there was the time at NBC, you've been IndyCar, the sports car stuff. Cup, it is American racing through and through, stock car, NASCAR. Have you been accepted now that you're the voice for a certain part of the year? We've got to point out to our listeners that there are multiple rights holders who cover different parts of the season, but how are you accepted when you're not? You don't have that accent that the rest of them have.
I can't say thank you enough to the fan base, because they have welcomed me really warmly. Of course, there's a percentage that it doesn't jive with because of the way I speak, and I totally understand that and respect that. That's a Formula One car revving in the background, by the way.
Just another thing at Adelaide.
Another thing at Adelaide. But I went into the NASCAR portion of my career, what I would say gently. Like I went in open eyes, open ears, open mind, and went in there fully acknowledging that this is a learning curve for me. I can't know everything about every form of motorsport, despite how much I love it. And so I would go to places and openly acknowledge on the broadcast, hey, this is my first time at Talladega. This is my first time at Darlington. This is my first time at Martinsville. And the fans love that, because, and even my teammates, Steve Letarte, Jeff Burton, two legends of the sport, they were like, Diff, the way you're looking at things is actually helping us, because we've been here a million times and we've kind of overlooked what you're noticing. And so it was kind of really, that first year, last year in 2024 was lovely. This year was even better. I've really enjoyed interacting with the fans at the track. They have some really interesting questions. They want to know what I think, and how I feel about certain things and what's caught my attention. And I love the racing. I never in my wildest dreams thought that I'd be calling NASCAR in America. So I'm loving the ride. Can't wait for it to keep going.
What's different about calling for an American audience versus, say, back in the day calling supercars for an Australian audience? If you stand back and look at your calling, have you changed it? Have you tailored it? Have you modified it over the journey?
I think if I were to pull up a tape of me commentating supercars in the late 1990s, I would be very localised and probably more colloquialisms and things like that. So going to the UK and working for the BBC before then going to America, just kind of talk more openly, and hopefully I sound a little more polished now because I've had to slow down. Aussies have a way of speaking very fast, and I think probably I used to do that, and just opening my mouth a bit more and enunciating better and trying to speak more clearly, and so I would say if I went back and did an A-B comparison, that's how I would hopefully think it would sound. But I'm very proud of the fact that I've never lost my Australian accent, and it's been something that if I'm doing track and field at the Olympics, or I'm doing NASCAR or whatever it might be, after all these years, people know that instantly that it's me, because there's nobody else on American sports television who sounds like me.
If we go back to the late 90s, my voice was like this.
Yeah.
And
me too.
No, mine was much more like that, because I think I was about 14. But do you remember being pestered by a young kid from Ballarat, and somehow, I don't know how this happened, to end up on a radio show in Ballarat every supercar round on a Saturday morning when you're in Channel 10 land, and dialing in to a program called Motoring On Air in Ballarat? Was that really you, or did that really happen?
That really happened, and I did it. Initially, I can't remember if the request came through Network 10 Sport, PR or Communications or something, but I said yes. And from the very first time I spoke to you, and you were still a school kid, it was very evident of your knowledge, but the thing that gripped me more was your enthusiasm. And I've had the fortune of talking to a lot of young aspiring broadcasters or journalists or whomever, and whatever walk of life you're in, I always like to say enthusiasm always wins out. If you're passionate about something, you're a step ahead of the next person. And I could tell, even though it was on the other end of a telephone, how enthusiastic and knowledgeable you were. And look at where your career's gone, to commentating on network television, creating your own brand with V8 Sleuth and magazine and the podcast and everything else you've done. I'm not even one ounce surprised of how well your career's gone, because I knew that kid back when, and so that's the whole reason I kept coming back on your radio show, because I was intrigued by and I was energized by your energy. So my turn to say congrats to you, because you've carved out a really cool career for yourself.
The check will clear. The check will clear. Do you think we could go Indy Sleuth, Stock Car Sleuth, Sports Car Sleuth, anything other sleuth? What's the go, do you reckon? I mean, supercars is great. We've loved that, and there's more to do, but there's a big world out there, isn't there? There's plenty of chassis numbers for us to go digging on.
Is there an Australian calling NASCAR at the moment?
Last time I checked, yes.
So anything's possible.
Do you remember the line, if you don't jump?
Well, if you don't jump, you won't fly. You've got to go to the edge of the cliff first and have a look, right? So, but yeah, anything's possible, mate. I mean, I think the footprint that you've created here, why not duplicate it elsewhere?
I now hit that point where people are asking me for advice on things, and I have stolen the "if you don't jump, you don't fly" line. So the royalties will be cleaned up in the aftermath of all this. But a lot of people have bailed you up this weekend here in Adelaide to talk about the Channel 10 days and the V8 days and Adelaide days and all that stuff. But one of the things I don't think many people will have stopped you and talked to you about, I did the other day, because it was a one-off that a lot of people will not remember. But they should. Do you remember the race of 1,000 years? Oh, yeah. The Grand Prix track, yeah. The sports cars, the Audis, the Panoses, that was seriously cool. And anyone who missed that really missed out.
It was a truly adventurous, gutsy experiment. It never returned, because there's a deeper story with politics and money and
motor racing, politics and money. What are you talking about, really?
Yeah, but for local businessman here in Adelaide, who's been a friend of mine for more than 20 years, Dean Rainsford, I had lunch with him the other day here in Adelaide. He and Dr. Don Paynos, who is sadly no longer around, they came together and they made magic, and they worked so hard to bring what was then the fledgling, just the recently formed American Le Mans Series to Australia. And look, still to this day, there is an Asian Le Mans Series and a European Le Mans Series still in existence because of Don Panos. And when he and Dean Rainsford formed and they brought that race here, you might remember it was New Year's Eve. In excess, without Michael Hutchins, played the after-race concert. Audi Sport came with the crocodile car. Alan McNish hurt his back. Brad Jones had to get subbed in. It was just another unreal weekend for Adelaide, and they're great memories. I had just left Australia, so it was pretty funny to come back. Just a year out, come back to Adelaide. But I'd been working, even though I was in the UK, I would go to America and work on the American Le Mans Series for the Aussie audience, which was part of all the build-up to the race of 1,000 years. So they're really happy, even though they're long ago, they're really happy memories, and that was an awesome event.
I think one of those Cadillacs ended up out here in Australia for a little while. That might be a bit of sports car sleuthing, though, for another day. Somewhere along the journey, has there ever been a pull or an attempt to get you back here, to whether it was TV or any other roles? Has there been an attempt or two to try to drag you back here?
There's been some I would say very, very loose inquiries, but that's flattering. But the reality is that when I left here, I had no guarantees, and I had to make sure that my leaving what was then a very secure, wonderful career in Australia, I had no choice but to make it work. I had no idea how I was going to make it work. It cost me my first marriage, that was how determined I was to make it work. I was so, laser focused on doing what I needed to do, and so therefore I made my life overseas. My wife, my children, we have been entrenched in the US for so long, more than 20 years, and that is home. And so, our kids are still in high school. Even if there was an opportunity to come back, I've had such a great time in the US and continue to with NBC Sports, and I think it's more of a romantic notion about coming back to Australia, because you can't come back to what was, and I'm living in the now, and the now is amazing. And I think if I were to ever come back to Australia, it would be long after the kids have graduated college and my career's kind of winding down. I'd love to still be with NBC Sports through 2032 and the Brisbane Olympics, because that would mark my 10th Olympic Games, and to call my 10th Games in my home city, that'd be pretty cool.
I was going to ask you Olympics. As an Olympics tragic as a young fella, you've been able to be there on site, on the ground. 100-metre men's final is the blue ribbon event of Olympics. The Usain Bolts, the Carl Lewises, all the greats of over the years. But it's over in less than 10 seconds. Bathurst 1000, 6 hours. At Indy 500's a couple of hours. Daytona's a couple of hours. You got 10 seconds or 9.8, 7, 9, however fast they're running, to get it right. How do you get it right for a 10-second race? Because it would seem to everybody else out there, how hard can it be? It's a 10-second race, but it's actually unbelievably difficult. Talk us through that, because I'm so intrigued by something that's, it's like a drag race, really, isn't it? Just with humans and slightly slower.
You just have to, you watch the lanes, you watch for the movement, you trust your eyes. At these most recent Paris Games, I had an error on the finish of the men's 100. It was the closest ever finish in Olympic men's 100 history. It was 5,000ths of a second. I trusted my instinct in my eyes, and like a lot of the world, we thought the Jamaican had won it. Noah Lyles, the American, even went over and congratulated him and said, "You got me, bro." And it took, I think, a minute and a half or so for the photo finish to reveal that Noah won. So I actually got that wrong. And I've had lots of great race calls and lots of great 100 calls, but it is a difficult race to call. And when it's as close as that, it's pretty exhilarating. When they're all coming to the line, it's quite amazing. And I have really enjoyed my years of doing track and field, either domestically, the World Championships, the Olympics, because I find a lot of commonality with motorsport.
Yeah.
And the longer the race goes on, the more, from anything maybe from 1,500 up reminds me a lot of motorsport, with the strategy, the placement, when do you go, how do you start, how do you finish, have you saved enough, do you come in for a 2-tyre stop or a 4? There's a lot of parallels between track and racing.
We have had Gregory Rust on this podcast before. You've known him a very long time. He won't hear this. What's your favourite Greg Rust story, stitch up? By the way, there's a crash happening behind us in the Aussie race car race. That's why everyone's hooting and hollering. But how can we stitch Rusty? What have you got for us on him?
I've got about 1,001 stories on Greg Rust. The one that jumps out to me is one time we were driving down to Phillip Island for MotoGP, and we're in the renter van, and it was me, my oldest friend in life, Daryl Beattie, and Rusty. And I'm not sure why when we had Daryl in the car, but Rusty always insisted on driving. I think he fancied himself as a driver. He's a good go-kart driver, I have to say. But anyway, we're sailing down there halfway between Melbourne and Phillip Island, and just out of nowhere, Daryl pulled the handbrake on, and you've never seen Rusty's eyes and voice. His eyes so big and his voice so high, and he's swinging that steering wheel to save his life. We ended up down in the culvert, down in the middle, and Daryl and I were just crying, laughing, and Rusty had about 3 heart attacks. So that's the kind of stuff we used to get up to.
He's pretty easy to wind up, though, really. I mean, it's not that hard.
Look, we were so lucky back in those Channel 10 days, people refer to as the golden days, which they really were, the golden era, because of a gentleman by the name of David White, our boss, who had to manage Bill Woods, Barry Sheen, me, Daryl Beattie, Greg Rust, Matty White, Mark Osler. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Mark Howard, Howie. And that was took quite a wrangling, but we had a lot of fun in those days and did a lot of great work. And for all the years that I've lived overseas and worked with different networks, I still look back at those days so fondly for the friendships that were formed and the friendships that we still have because of First of all, Mike Ordsent, it was the predecessor to David, but David White was the guy who really drove home all those great things with supercars, Formula One, a champ car back then, motorcycle racing. David formed 1HD. He was a visionary in that regard. So we were very lucky, and motorsport in Australia was very lucky to have David at the helm of Network 10.
Because he loves racing, but he actually got behind the wheel, Targas and all that stuff, and he's a tragic for it too. All right, we've gone very gentle on Greg there. Crompton, what have you got for us on Crompton? Because he won't listen to this. He doesn't do socials, he doesn't do podcasts. You could have a free run here and he'll never know.
Well, he's Mr. Perfect, isn't he? So it's kind of hard to throw some mud on him, but he is at times quite anal. He's very,
at times.
At times, he's very buttoned up. He's very, very precise. I'd almost like to see him be less prepared and enjoy life a bit more, but that's not how he's wired. He's been like a big brother to me, so I haven't really stirred him up all that much. I love the fact that he loves America so much, and he loves that I'm over there, and we have that in commonality. I do remember once when he went to the States, he lived in America for just under a year when he raced the North American Super Touring Championship, and I was his houseminder. So, and there were strict instructions, and it was very detailed, and I didn't have to wonder about anything. But he asked me to send him something, and just being a little bit young and naive, he had all these FedEx envelopes in his office, Mr. Organised, and I did whatever this kind of thing that wasn't very urgent. I put it in a FedEx, envelope and sent it, and it cost about $150 that could have gone in the mail for about 35 cents, and he ripped it up me so much. What do you think? I'm made of money, blah blah blah, and he wasn't happy with me then, but. No, he's good, and he's had quite the run in broadcasting in Australia, and he's world class.
just recently we've fired a little sub-brand in super touring, Sleuth. And I know you've told this many times before of how the sort of the break was in the 90s with the super touring stuff here in Australia, but because that stuff's now so long ago, I think it's come back around in almost retro land of those cars, that series. Around the world, it was worldwide, but Audis, BMWs, privateers, Brock in a Volvo. Looking back on all that is absolutely cool stuff, and now it's prime for everyone who perhaps didn't appreciate at the time how cool it was. But for you, that was kind of and I know you have talked about this a lot over the time, but this was the bit that got you really up and rolling.
That was what started it all. I mean, I was doing public address announcing for dirt track motorcycles. That's where it started. Then motocross. My dear friend Phil Christensen, who was Mr. Supercross of Australia, he then put me on Supercross. So it was all that very early beginnings. Rusty and I started doing PA announcing at Oran Park on trucks, super trucks and stuff. And but then it was through my friendship with Darryl Beattie that I met Paul Morris, and I commentated a party at Paul Morris's ranch, Dude's Acres, and we were in an old like an old Telstra van. It was painted up like a safari wagon, and we drilled a hole through the roof and put like a loudspeaker on the roof, and I was driving around with Paul and we were drinking beer, and this activity that you had to do at Paul's ranch, you had to do like a lap of the farm on bareback on a horse, you had to do a lap of his lake on a jet ski, you had to do a lap on an Odyssey, you had to go down the slip and slide, and at the bottom of it scull a beer, and it was all on the stopwatch, right? And we're driving around in this safari van and I'm commentating it just like on a tannoy, like on a loudspeaker, and many conversations off to the side, and me annoying people behind the scenes like Calvin O'Reilly and Tim Jardine and different people. They'd had the first round of the 1996 Super Touring Championship, and they wanted to make a change in commentary, and I just said to Paul, look, I think I could, I don't know, what do you think? And he went to his dad, and they invited me to go to Lakeside that weekend. I met the producers, and they said, well, we'll give you kind of almost like an audition or a screen test, and went back to Sydney. And they edited 5 minutes, and I just had to call it, not like in a sound booth or anything, just in an editing booth. And they gave me the job, but that was really the drivers behind that were Paul and Terry Morris. And that's so that super touring year of 1996 changed my life. Like, forget changing my career or starting my career, it changed my life.
So getting on the piss on a loudspeaker can be a good thing.
On that occasion, it was.
Then the V8 thing started the next year because the rights changed to Channel 10. But another thing that a lot of people forget, and this is deep diving out of the brain cells for you, but NASCAR that you're doing now in Cup Series is not the first NASCAR racing that you've done. We still have the now somewhat dormant Calder Park Thunderdome, but that was a place where you did NASCAR and Oscar back in the day.
Crazy, absolutely crazy to think about that. That was in 1996 as well, and there was like the Australian. What was the Australian version? It was Oscar, but there was also another one.
The Sportsman was the old Oscar. The NASCARs, the HQs, the Legend cars, bit of everything.
One went one way. One went anti-clockwise, so true NASCAR style, and the other one went clockwise. So whichever series it was. But yeah, I did that, and with John Smales, my old friend John Smales, and crazy how the world turns. Back then, one of the big engine builders for everything out at Calder Park, all those cars, the leading engine builder was Les Small, who worked very closely with John Faulkner and many other teams. Well, fast forward to these days, and one of my best mates is James Small, his son, who's the crew chief at Joe Gibbs Racing for Chase Briscoe. So, almost 30 years ago when I was calling oval racing here in Australia, and now I am in America, and with James, and we talk about those old times. I mean, he was a kid, so it's just sitting here talking to you about it, reflecting, is quite mind-blowing.
It's an amazing story, yours. I mean, we talk so much about Aussie racing exports, and the focus is very much on the drivers, but your journey, your history, your career, there's plenty of stuff to come. You're not nowhere near the end of the book yet, and we could go for an hour or two or three or four here, but mate, congratulations. Thanks for the time. It's so great to catch up with you, and we might have to do some more sleuthing and come and visit you at some stage.
Please do. It'd be great to have you over there, and I'm very grateful for my upbringing in the Australian motorsport scene, because I think the way that I learnt about motorsport here and the way that I learned about television here still stands me in good stead. A lot of the work values and the work ethic that I learnt here has helped me throughout my career, whether that be in the UK and Europe and America. It's a great place to grow up. It's a great motorsport scene, and I love being an ambassador of sorts for it on an international stage. And like I said earlier, I'm very proud that I haven't lost my Aussie accent and keep flying the Aussie motorsport and TV flag proudly overseas.
Great to catch up with Leigh Diffey in Adelaide. So many stories, and as I said, an amazing export story of Australian motor racing to the US. I mean, the career that he's had so far, and I'm sure there's plenty more to come, has been nothing short of unbelievable. But he is such a good dude that has never let all of that stuff go to his head, of the circles that he moves in and the reach that he's got and the connections that he has across world sport and world motorsport. It was great to catch up with him. I hope you enjoyed that little snapshot, and maybe one day down the track we can catch up with him for a bit of a longer deep dive into his history and some of the other stuff relating to his career. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the pod. Don't forget the next episode of The Undercut with myself, Jack Perkins, James Moffat. You can watch it on our YouTube channel, on our website, and also listen to it here via the podcast platform that you listen to this episode on. In the meantime, I'm Aaron Noonan. Catch you next time. Bye for now.